The chill of late autumn bit through General Armand Dubois' worn greatcoat as he stumbled through the decimated French countryside. The air, thick with the stench of smoke and despair, clung to everything. Days blurred into a nightmare of strategic withdrawals, shattered hopes, and the constant thrum of distant artillery. His uniform, once crisp and proud, was now caked with mud and the dust of fallen dreams. He was a general in name, but in spirit he was just a man, bone-weary and burdened by the weight of a nation crumbling around him. His small, ragged detachment, a handful of exhausted soldiers, their faces etched with fear and resignation, followed his lead, their steps heavy. They had been separated from the main forces during a chaotic skirmish near a crossroads, and now, under the cover of a moonless night, they sought any refuge from the omnipresent threat of German patrols. The flickering light of their single, failing lantern cast long, dancing shadows, distorting the familiar landscape into a grotesque, unfamiliar tableau. They walked for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves and the distant haunting cries of some nocturnal creature. Dubois' mind replayed the day's brutal encounter, the sound of machine gun fire, the screams, the sight of young men, barely more than boys, falling. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of the colossal failure that enveloped them. He was supposed to protect them, to lead them to victory, but all he saw was defeat. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, a faint outline emerged from the gloom, a dilapidated barn, its roof sagging but seemingly intact. A glimmer of hope, however fragile, sparked within him. "Over there," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "We'll take shelter there for the night." The men, grateful for any respite, quickened their pace, their relief palpable. As they approached, the scent of hay and old wood filled the air, a strangely comforting aroma amidst the desolation. Dubois pushed open the creaking wooden doors, revealing a cavernous interior, dark and silent. It was a temporary haven, a brief reprieve from the relentless reality outside. He just hoped it was enough. If you're finding this story gripping, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got so much more coming your way. The barn's interior was cold and musty, but offered a sense of concealment. Dubois and his men settled in, finding whatever comfort they could amidst the scattered hay bales. The general leaned against a rough-hewn beam, his eyes scanning the gloom, perpetually alert. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with the constant threat of discovery. His thoughts, however, drifted to his family, to the life he had left behind in Paris, a life that felt like a distant, fading dream. He wondered if they were safe, if they were even alive. The uncertainty was a torment worse than any physical pain. As dawn approached, a faint, almost imperceptible sound broke the stillness. A soft rustling, followed by a barely audible cough. Dubois' hand instinctively went to his sidearm. His men, equally on edge, tensed, their rifles raised. He strained his ears, his breath held. The sound came again, closer this time, a tiny whimper. Slowly, cautiously, Dubois moved towards the source of the noise, his steps light. He pushed aside a pile of hay, and there, huddled in the deepest shadow, was a small figure. A boy, no older than 10, his knees drawn to his chest, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, a flicker of recognition. The boy's clothes were patched and dirty, his face smudged, but his gaze was direct, unwavering. A moment of stunned silence hung in the air. Dubois, a hardened general accustomed to the brutality of war, felt an unexpected jolt. He had expected an enemy, a civilian perhaps, but not a child, alone in a deserted barn. "Who are you?" Dubois asked, his voice softer than he intended, a stark contrast to the gruff commands he usually barked. The boy remained silent, his small body trembling slightly. One of Dubois' sergeants, a grizzled veteran named Henri, stepped forward, his rifle still aimed. "General, he could be a spy," he whispered, his voice laced with suspicion. Dubois waved him off, his eyes still fixed on the boy. There was no malice in those innocent eyes, only a profound vulnerability. He knew, instinctively, that this child posed no threat, only a mystery. The boy slowly unfolded himself, his gaze still fixed on Dubois, his lips parted, and a thin, reedy voice, surprisingly clear, cut through the tension. "General, you promised." Dubois frowned, a sudden chill running down his spine. "Promised what, child?" he asked, his mind racing, searching for any memory that connected him to this young stranger. He had met countless civilians during the war, made countless assurances, but nothing specific came to mind. The boy took a hesitant step forward, his eyes never leaving Dubois' face. "You said you'd come back," he repeated, a tremor in his voice. "When the Germans were gone, you said you'd come back for the parade." A vague, almost forgotten memory stirred within Dubois. A small village, weeks, maybe months ago. A brief stop for supplies, a fleeting moment of camaraderie with the villagers, a group of children gathered around him, wide-eyed and hopeful. He had, in a moment of perhaps foolish optimism, spoken of victory, of a return, of a parade celebrating liberation. It was a common refrain, a way to bolster morale, to offer a sliver of hope in desperate times. He had never imagined those words would be remembered so vividly by a child in this desolate place. "You were at Sainte-Marie?" Dubois asked, the name of the village suddenly surfacing in his memory. The boy nodded, a faint light of recognition in his eyes. "My name is Antoine," he whispered. "My mother told me you were a good man. You gave me a piece of chocolate." A lump formed in Dubois' throat. A piece of chocolate, a casual gesture, had etched itself into this child's memory, forming the foundation of a profound trust. He, a general responsible for thousands, had forgotten a fleeting interaction, while this boy, displaced and alone, clung to it as a beacon. The weight of his unspoken promise, a promise made in a different time, under different circumstances, settled heavily upon him. It was a promise of hope, a promise of a future that now seemed impossibly distant. Antoine, though initially wary, slowly began to share his story. His voice was soft, but the words carried the sharp edges of hardship. His village, Sainte-Marie, had been occupied by the Germans weeks after Dubois' brief visit. Life under occupation had been brutal, marked by scarcity, fear, and the constant presence of enemy soldiers. His father, a quiet farmer, had been taken away for resisting a requisition order. Antoine hadn't seen him since. His mother, heartbroken and terrified, had managed to send him away with a group of fleeing refugees, hoping to spare him a similar fate. "They said I should go with them to a safer place," Antoine explained, his gaze fixed on a distant point, as if reliving the painful separation. "But then, the planes came, we scattered. I ran, and I didn't see anyone else after that." He had been alone for days, surviving on scraps, seeking shelter wherever he could find it. He had stumbled upon the barn by chance, drawn by the faint outline against the horizon, just as Dubois and his men had. His words painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture of the civilian toll of war, a reality that often remained abstract to those focused on the grand strategy of battle. Dubois listened, his initial surprise giving way to a profound sense of responsibility. This boy, a victim of the very conflict he was fighting, had placed an innocent trust in him, a trust based on a forgotten promise. Sergeant Henri, initially suspicious, had softened considerably as Antoine spoke. He too had children, and the boy's plight resonated deeply. The other soldiers, hardened by combat, also seemed visibly moved. Antoine's story was a stark reminder of what they were fighting for, the innocent lives caught in the devastating crossfire. The general felt a renewed sense of purpose, a flicker of the old fire rekindling within him. This wasn't just about strategy or territory, it was about protecting the vulnerable, about fulfilling a promise however small, to a child who had nothing left but hope. If you're captivated by Antoine's journey and General Dubois' struggle, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. Your support helps us create content like this. The revelation of Antoine's story weighed heavily on Dubois. He, a general trained in the art of war, now found himself responsible for a vulnerable child in the heart of enemy-occupied territory. His strategic mind, usually focused on troop movements and supply lines, now grappled with the immediate human problem of Antoine's safety. How could he, an officer on the run, protect a boy who had already lost so much? He looked at Antoine, who was now quietly watching the soldiers, his initial fear slowly replaced by a fragile sense of security. The boy's eyes, though still carrying the shadow of trauma, held a glimmer of hope, a hope that Dubois felt he had no right to betray. That innocent gaze was a powerful, silent plea, a reminder of the fundamental humanity they were fighting to preserve. "We cannot leave him," Dubois stated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Sergeant Henri nodded in agreement, the earlier suspicion completely gone from his face. "He comes with us, General," he affirmed. The other soldiers, too, silently assented. Antoine, sensing their decision, offered a small, shy smile, a fleeting moment of pure relief that pierced through the grim reality of their situation. The presence of Antoine changed the dynamic of their small group. The soldiers, usually stoic and focused solely on survival, now showed a paternal instinct, offering the boy bits of their meager rations and sharing hushed words of comfort. Antoine, in turn, seemed to bring a subtle shift in their morale. His innocence, his unwavering trust, served as a poignant reminder of the lives they were fighting to reclaim, of the future they hoped to secure. He was no longer just a burden. He was a symbol, a fragile embodiment of the hope that still flickered amidst the despair of war. Dubois, observing this subtle transformation, understood that in protecting Antoine, they were, in a way, protecting a piece of their own humanity. Their journey resumed with Antoine, now part of their small, desperate band. The boy, surprisingly resilient, kept pace with the soldiers, his small legs moving determinedly. They traveled mostly at night, moving through dense forests and across open fields, always seeking the cover of darkness and avoiding the main roads, which were heavily patrolled by German forces. The weather worsened, a cold, persistent rain, soaking them to the bone, turning the already treacherous terrain into a muddy quagmire. Dubois, despite his own exhaustion, remained vigilant. His military training kicked in, adapting to the new challenge of protecting a child in hostile territory. He taught Antoine how to move silently, how to identify safe hiding spots, and how to stay low when danger approached. Antoine, a quick learner, absorbed every instruction, his instincts honed by his recent ordeal. He understood the gravity of their situation, yet he never complained, his silent stoicism a testament to his innate strength. Food was scarce, and they rationed their meager supplies carefully. Antoine, despite his hunger, always insisted on sharing, a small gesture of reciprocity that touched the hardened soldiers. They relied on their knowledge of the land, finding wild berries and foraging for edible roots, anything to keep their strength up. The constant threat of discovery loomed over them, a silent, invisible enemy. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through their veins. One evening, as they rested in a hollow, a distant rumble of engines grew louder. Dubois immediately signaled for them to take cover. They pressed themselves against the wet earth, hidden beneath a tangle of bushes, as a column of German trucks rumbled past on a nearby road, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Antoine, nestled close to Dubois, held his breath, his small hand gripping the general's greatcoat. The general felt the boys trembling, a stark reminder of the constant fear that permeated their lives. This perilous journey was not just about survival, it was about protecting that trembling hand, that fragile hope for a future. After days of relentless travel, They reached a crucial point, a partially destroyed stone bridge spanning a swift, swollen river. It was their only viable path to the south, where rumors of Allied resistance forces were beginning to circulate. However, a small German outpost was clearly visible on the far bank, guarding the crossing. The rain had intensified, making the river treacherous, its current powerful and unforgiving. "We can't cross there," Sergeant Henry whispered, his voice grim. "It's too heavily guarded. We'd be walking into a trap." Dubois knew he was right. A direct assault would be suicidal for their small, depleted group, especially with Antoine in tow. Yet time was running out. They couldn't stay in their current position. German patrols were likely to be scouring the area. They were faced with a terrible choice: attempt a perilous river crossing under the cover of darkness, or risk discovery by staying put. Antoine, sensing the tension, looked up at Dubois. "What do we do, General?" he asked, his voice small but steady. The question, innocent in its delivery, nevertheless underscored the immense responsibility weighing on Dubois. He wasn't just making a strategic decision, he was deciding the fate of everyone in his small band, including a child who believed in him. Dubois studied the river, the raging current, and the distant German lights. A plan, desperate but perhaps feasible, began to form in his mind. It would require immense courage and a bit of luck. He turned to his men. "We cross the river, but not by the bridge," he announced, his voice low but firm. "We'll use the raft near the old mill. It's a risk, but it's our best chance." The soldiers exchanged nervous glances, but their trust in their general was unwavering. Dubois looked at Antoine, whose eyes, though wide with apprehension, held a steadfast resolve. This was a choice born of necessity, a gamble for survival, and the boy's unwavering presence was a powerful motivator. If you're on the edge of your seat and want to see how General Dubois and Antoine overcome this incredible challenge, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We're building a community of storytelling enthusiasts, and we'd love for you to join us. The old mill was a skeletal ruin, but beneath its crumbling shelter lay a small makeshift raft, surprisingly sturdy. It had clearly been used by locals for river crossings before the war, a silent testament to their ingenuity. The rain, however, continued to pour, swelling the river to a furious torrent. The water crashed against the banks, its roar echoing through the night. "This is madness, General," one of the younger soldiers muttered, his face pale in the dim light. "The current, it's too strong." Dubois knew the risks. The river was a powerful, unpredictable adversary. But there was no other way. "We have to try," he said, his voice resolute. "Antoine, you'll be in the middle. Hold on tight." The boy, though visibly afraid, nodded bravely. Securing their equipment, they pushed the raft into the churning water. The moment it hit the current, the raft bucked violently. The soldiers, straining against the makeshift paddles, fought to keep it steady. The river pulled at them, trying to drag them downstream, towards the German outpost. The cold water splashed over them, drenching them, biting at their exposed skin. Antoine, huddled between two soldiers, clung to their clothes, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe as the dark, swirling water rushed past. Dubois, at the front of the raft, directed their efforts, his eyes fixed on the distant bank. Every muscle in his body strained with the effort, his teeth gritted against the cold and the fear. The roar of the river drowned out all other sounds, creating a terrifying, isolated world on the small raft. At one point, a large log, carried by the current, slammed into the side of the raft, almost capsizing it. The soldiers cried out, struggling to regain control. Dubois, with a surge of adrenaline, pushed against the log with his paddle, his arms burning, managing to deflect it just enough. They continued their desperate struggle, inch by agonizing inch, against the river's relentless fury. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour of grueling effort, the current began to lessen its grip. They were slowly but surely approaching the opposite bank, further downstream from the German outpost. The exhaustion was bone deep, but a collective sigh of relief, audible even over the receding roar of the river, swept through the group. They guided the raft towards a small, rocky cove, hidden by dense overgrowth. With a final, shared effort, they pulled the raft onto the muddy bank, collapsing onto the wet earth, gasping for breath. The cold, wet, and utterly spent soldiers lay there for a few moments, the adrenaline slowly draining from their bodies, leaving them with a profound sense of weary triumph. Dubois, though equally exhausted, was the first to rise. He checked on Antoine, who was shivering but unharmed, his eyes still wide with the recent ordeal. "Are you all right, son?" Dubois asked, his voice rough with fatigue. Antoine nodded, a small, grateful smile flickering across his face. "Yes, General," he whispered. As they rested, drying off as best they could, Dubois observed his men. Despite the harrowing journey, a subtle shift had occurred. The shared ordeal, the collective struggle to overcome the river's fury, had forged a stronger bond between them. And Antoine, the small boy they had reluctantly taken in, had become an intrinsic part of their group, a shared responsibility that had, paradoxically, lightened their individual burdens. He was no longer just a general leading his men. He was, in a way, a protector of hope, a guardian of a future that felt a little less impossible now. The distant sound of German patrols faded into the background, replaced by the quiet determination that settled over the weary group. The following weeks were still fraught with danger, but a tangible sense of purpose propelled them forward. They continued south, avoiding major roads and relying on the kindness of sympathetic villagers, many of whom were also secretly aiding the resistance. Antoine, with his innocent demeanor, often helped them gain trust and access to supplies that would otherwise be denied. He had become their quiet, unwitting ambassador, a reminder of the human cost of the war. Eventually, after a final tense encounter with a German patrol that they managed to evade through Dubois' quick thinking and the soldiers' disciplined execution, they finally made contact with a unit of the French resistance. The reunion was emotional, a moment of profound relief and cautious celebration. Dubois was able to relay vital intelligence about German troop movements and strategic positions, information that would prove invaluable to the Allied cause. As Dubois prepared to rejoin the larger Allied forces, a quiet moment occurred. Antoine, his small hand still clutching a piece of the chocolate Dubois had given him weeks ago, looked up at the general. He didn't speak of parades or grand celebrations, for the harsh realities of war had matured him far beyond his years. Instead, he simply looked at Dubois, his eyes reflecting a profound gratitude. "Thank you, General," Antoine said, his voice barely a whisper. "You came back." Dubois knelt, meeting the boy's gaze. He knew the war was far from over and the future was still uncertain. But in that moment, seeing the hope in Antoine's eyes, he felt a deeper sense of fulfillment than any military victory could have given him. He had not only survived, he had kept a promise, an unspoken, profound promise of protection and hope to a child who had every reason to lose faith. He had brought Antoine to safety, not to a grand parade, but to a place where he had a chance at a future. The general, who had sought shelter in a barn, had found not just refuge, but a renewed purpose, guided by the simple, unwavering trust of a boy. And that concludes our powerful story. The general took shelter in a barn, then a boy said, "You promised you'd come back." We hope you were moved by this tale of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of human connection. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more compelling and realistic stories. Your support helps us bring these narratives to life. Thank you for watching.